Welcome back to the channel. In this video I'll be going over every book that has helped me thus far in my journey, and I hope these will help you too to a larger extent. You may skip ahead in the video to get a better idea of what books I'll be covering, but in general I'll be going over non-fiction titles that I believe are a great help to you. First of all, The 4-Hour Workweek. I originally listened to this book as an audiobook while I was still riding the bus to school, and I believe it was a wise way to spend that time, not only because it got me into audiobooks in the first place, but because it allowed me to get a greater perspective on how financial difficulties work and how to overcome them. This book, written by Tim Ferriss, is a self-help guide for people who want to escape the traditional 9-to-5 work week and achieve a more flexible and fulfilling lifestyle. And the book provides tips and tricks for maximizing efficiency and outsourcing tasks to create more free time, as well as advice on how to build a successful business that can be run remotely. I actually applied the advice from this book in the process of hiring my editors to edit some of my videos for me. The general idea of the 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss is that you can lessen the amount of time that you work by simply outsourcing the most difficult tasks that you have to other people and hiring them to do it, and then taking a profit margin from it. So, for example, if there's a video that you have to edit for $10 for someone, you can probably find someone who will edit it for $5. And then not only do you get the job done and you get the $10, but you pocket the other $5. And if you apply this throughout your life, you'll save a lot of money. And this is actually a pretty efficient process of starting a business, especially if you're doing something like social media marketing online or e-commerce. You can easily just outsource basic tasks to other people. And for this way, although a bit cheesy, you will actually find yourself earning more money and saving a lot more. Next up, The Millionaire Fastlane by M.J. DeMarco. This book is a guide to building wealth and achieving financial independence. The book argues that traditional methods of wealth building, such as working hard, saving money, and investing conservatively, are outdated and ineffective. So this book is pretty much a testament to don't complain about buying $3 coffee. Spend as much money on food and clothes and coffee as you wish, because you should be making more than that anyway. And if you're not earning enough money to eat and live how you want, then you're doing something wrong. Instead, the author advocates for taking risks, starting a successful business, and focusing on creating value for others is the key to building wealth quickly. So what M.J. DeMarco emphasizes in this book is that by creating value for others, you'll effectively become higher up on the ladder, and therefore not only people will be more likely to take your advice and take lessons from you, but they will be more likely to buy your products or invest in your business. And he compares this analogy using roads, the slow lane and the fast lane. So the slow lane would be something like going to university and getting a 9-to-5 job, while the fast lane would be taking risks and making sacrifices in order to find the quickest way to earn money on the side, often by sacrificing way more time and resources. And the idea is that through exponential growth on the fast lane, you'll be able to achieve mass wealth within only a few years or decades time, which is a pretty optimistic outlook. So the Millionaire Fastlane, Crack the Code to Wealth and Live Rich for a Lifetime, pretty good financial guide. 48 Laws of Power. This one is a really long book, but I heavily recommend it. I've got a physical copy of it that I keep right next to my desk. It's one of the Robert Greene books that I highly recommend. Written by Robert Greene, this book is a guide to understanding power dynamics and how to manipulate them to achieve success. The book offers 48 separate strategies for gaining and maintaining power, drawing on examples from history and literature to illustrate each point. So Robert Greene, because this is pretty much his writing style, uses historical analyses and at least 3 examples of historical events for each chapter from various eras, in order to craft a greater picture of what he means by power. And just from a point of view of already understanding history and knowing the general map of historical events, of geography, of geopolitics, this book will actually really help you. So if you're a fan of strategy games, or if you're super into like 20th century history or psychology or philosophy, these are pretty good backgrounds to get an understanding of this book on. And you'll find this really enjoyable, actually. So the author argues that understanding these laws and using them strategically can help individuals achieve their goals and overcome their enemies, which is a pretty good argument. Next up, how to win friends and influence people. This one is offered by Dale Carnegie, who is a well-known speaker and lecturer, and this book is a classic self-help guide to interpersonal communication and relationship building. It focuses on both of these to some extent. And the book provides practical tips for connecting with others, gaining their trust, and persuading them to see things from your perspective. One of the most determinate parts of this is talking less and listening more. That's pretty much what the book focuses on. So whereas the 48 Laws of Power focuses on specific laws, like Law 17, the Law of Absence, How to Win Friends and Influence People focuses on specific rules. For example, the rule of being genuinely interested in what the other person has to contribute to the conversation, and that way relaxing the tension between the two of you and gaining influence over them, which is a pretty weird psychological dynamic that not a lot of people know about. So it provides practical tips for connecting with others, gaining trust, persuading them to see things from your perspective. The author argues that these skills are essential for success in both personal and professional contexts, which is profoundly true. And it's titled The Only Book You Need to Lead You to Success. While I believe that's a bit of a over-exaggeration, it is Dale Carnegie we're talking about. And it's a bit of a book on how to please people. So if you're not naturally good at that, maybe you should look forward to this. Your choice. Next up, The Art of War, probably the quickest read on all of these. This book, written by Sun Tzu, is a classic treatise on military strategy that has become wildly influential in other fields, including business, politics, and sports. And the book provides advice on how to win battles and achieve strategic goals, emphasizing the importance of deception, agility, and adapting to changing circumstances. This book is essentially just a book on planning, as well as adaptability, how to adapt to a difficult situation. So you may find this book helpful not only in, planning strategic battles or setting goals for the future, but just getting through life every day in general. If you view life as a war, then The Art of War will generally prove beneficial to you. And I believe there's a lot of good lessons to be learned from this book. Next up, The Way of the Superior Man, pretty much called the Masculine Bible. This book is pretty well known for providing a lot of insights into spirituality as well as male self-development, and it's become picked up by more people in recent years. Offered by David Dita, this book is a guide to achieving greater fulfillment and success in life and relationships. And the book provides advice on how to embrace one's masculine energy and cultivate deeper intimacy with others, as well as practical tips for achieving personal growth and overcoming obstacles. So the general idea of the Way of the Superior Man is that there's a cycle of weakness to strength, that by tapping into it, you may gain greater spiritual power and control over yourself, and that there is a polarity between masculine and feminine energy, whereas the feminine energy is creativity and art, and masculine energy is power and strength. And when these two are polarized, when they work against each other but also together in this weird compound way, the greatest feats of society are achieved, and he lists some of these in this book. This book also contains some general practices that you can use in your everyday life and with your relationships with other people in order to get a better, more stoic outlook on everything, which is pretty neat as well. So it's called A Spiritual Guide to Mastering the Challenges of Women, Work, and Sexual Desire. This is pretty accurate. David Dita is a really great author, and I cannot recommend this book enough. Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. So this book is a memoir and a self-help guide that tells the story of the author's journey from an abusive childhood to becoming a highly accomplished athlete and Navy SEAL. On top of this, David Goggins has become a bit more of a lecturer. He's went on multiple podcasts and talked about his mentality and philosophy, and he's also been called one of the toughest men alive, likely because he was one of the fattest men in America and decided to turn his life around at one point and achieved great military prowess through a doctrine of keeping himself going through the hard times with the belief that there is something to be gained at the other end of the line. The most powerful lesson that I've learned from Can't Hurt Me, and I speak this very plainly, is the practice of quote-unquote stealing souls, which deserves its own video. And the practice of stealing souls, as I understand it, but phrased differently in David Goggins' words, especially in the audiobook, is persevering in the face of odds that people throw at you. When you naturally start to succeed, people will challenge you in order to make themselves feel better. But if you overcome these challenges and act completely non-reactive to whatever people throw at you, you'll actually be able to turn your life around even more. When you're trying to get past the finish line and someone tries to stop you, not even acknowledging that person or that obstacle that's in your way will actually make you speed up. And this was a revelation that wasn't just present in the self-help community before David Goggins came out of his book, and he's also recently debuted a second one. So this speaks to the success of his book and his career as well, because of how important these lessons are to ordinary people, and how brutal this book is in its phrasing. There's a lot of language here that, when cut down into a more adaptable version for younger people, let's say, was reduced by around 1/3 of the pages. So 1/3 of this book was cut out because of vulgar language. So you pretty much know just the shit that he deals with throughout the book by that. The book provides practical tips for overcoming mental and physical challenges, emphasizing the importance of the discipline, persistence, and pushing beyond one's limits. And these are both physical and mental limits. Next up, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And this book particularly struck me because while I was reading it, I read a specific part about Napoleon Hill imagining himself surrounded by a table of rich people every night before bed. And usually before bed, I go and do a set of push-ups. And when I get into bed, I attempt to meditate to see if I can calm myself before sleep. And while I do this, I've actually implemented the practice of imagining myself in this vision that Napoleon Hill suggested, surrounded by the people that I'd like to be like. So these are famous people from history, your idols, maybe some family members, just a general circle where you get around, you talk to these people, of course, in your head, you imagine this. And having a vision like this can be greatly helpful throughout your waking life. And you can return to this space whenever you're calm, because you're training your brain, not moments when when you aren't busy, when you're just meditating by yourself or thinking, you're surrounded by this warm energy. And by pretty much gaslighting your brain into thinking that whenever you're alone, you're with the people that you want to be around, working by yourself towards your goals becomes a lot more enjoyable. And it's just some really sketchy spiritual shit that somehow works. And this book basically talks about attracting money. That's the main point. Offered by Napoleon Hill, this book is a classic self-help guide to achieving financial success and personal fulfillment. And the book provides practical advice on how to develop a positive mindset, set and achieve goals, and overcome obstacles to success, obviously. And the author, Napoleon Hill, emphasizes the importance of persistence, self-discipline, and positive thinking in achieving one's goals. It's basically a book on training your mind to be more positive. Next up, Atomic Habits by James Clear. This book is greatly overrated, and it's way too mainstream for me to truly recommend. Similar to The Art of Not Giving a Damn, but a bit different. Obviously up there on the New York Times bestseller list, but a general psychological guide on how to rewrite the bad habits of your life, how habits are formed, and how to kick them off. If you've been, reading self-help books, or you've been trying to better your life, the lessons to be learned in Atomic Habits will not truly impact you that much. But it's a good place to start, I'd say. So, written by James Clear, this book is a guide to building good habits and breaking bad ones. The book emphasizes the importance of making small incremental changes to one's behavior in order to achieve lasting improvements in one's life. So it has the show up every day mentality. Just show up and do something. The author provides practical advice on how to create effective habits and eliminate harmful ones. It's like going to the gym every day, because every day is every day. It's just a general rule of thumb that the author tries to instill in you in order for you to break your bad habits and addictions. And it also has the lesson that if you don't think of yourself as a smoker, or a person that's trying to quit smoking when you're smoking, you'll be more likely to quit smoking. So a lot of people struggle with addictions because they believe they're addicted. A lot of people struggle with mental health issues because they believe they have mental health problems. If you cease believing it, if you start pretty much gaslighting yourself again into thinking that you're in a better position than you actually are, you will gradually start to believe it and act like it, and you will attract that energy. And it's much less spiritual than any of the other books that I've described here, but it's, as I said, a pretty good practical guide. Next up, No More Mr. Nice Guy, offered by Robert Glover, my bad. This book is a self-help guide for men who struggle with codependency and seeking the approval of others. And nice guy in this form is described as someone that is less empathetic to people and more sympathetic, but only for the belief that this will land them in good rapport with people. So it's not only about dealing with relationships and women, it's also about just being a people pleaser. And it serves as a nice polarity to How to Win Friends and Influence People, because these books sort of cancel each other out, and it lands you in a good middle spot if you read both of them. So the book provides practical advice on how to develop healthy boundaries, assert oneself, and cultivate a strong sense of self-worth and confidence. And both of these will be helpful in the long term for you. Next up, The Psychology of Selling. So this book is offered by Brian Tracy and is a guide to effective sales techniques and strategies. And it provides practical advice on how to build rapport with clients, overcome objections, and close sales. And the author emphasizes the importance of understanding the psychology of human behavior in order to be a successful salesperson. So he practically goes over the psychology of human behavior in a way that is applicable to salespeople. And this is a sort of an outdated book from the 80s and 90s. At least the formula which it uses are from the 80s and 90s, and it tries to instill the mentality that businessmen during this time used for sales calls. And by implementing the principles outlined here, you're actually more able to negotiate with people and better be, see yourself more adapt to coming to a compromise whenever you're making a sales call or just trying to pitch something to someone, which is very helpful in the long term. Next up, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and the book explores the psychological and social factors that contribute to the rise and maintenance of totalitarian regimes, and expands on the factors that indicate the rise of totalitarianism through media. So Matthias Desmet is a Belgian professor, and he wrote this book throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. I know you're tired of hearing about it, but that's pretty much what it is. And he broke down the social reasons for why countries and political systems closed their borders in order to contain the pandemic, and to what extent it affected the psyche of the collective. So he generally expands on how circumstances like this, as well as circumstances like war, affect people on a mass scale, and what hints there are in media, particularly like television and news, that indicate the rise of totalitarian regimes like Nazi Germany. So through the media, Matthias Desmet believes the people are influenced towards thinking a specific way, and it gears them towards totalitarianism, where they believe they're like a cog in a system. And this is particularly bad when the leader who is trying to push them in a specific direction does not do so honestly, does not outline his vision plainly, but it is more of the idea of resisting an oligarchy that is trying to maintain control of information, and the idea that information should be reclaimed in the modern age, which is actually a pretty good lesson to teach. And a person needs to know the warning signs of a declining society, especially through the media, if they're expected to make some good of themselves. So Matthias Desmet is a highly underrated author, and this being the most recent book on my list is definitely worth giving a shot. Next up, probably the oldest book on my list, Meditations. Nice contrast. This one's offered by Marcus Aurelius, who is a famous philosopher and a former Roman emperor, and he wrote these essays during his time as the Roman emperor. And the book is a collection of personal reflections and philosophical musings by him, and provides practical advice on how to live a virtuous and fulfilling life, emphasizing the importance of self-discipline, rationality, and acceptance of the natural order of things. It is the book that started the movement of Stoicism and the general Stoic philosophy, and outlines a lot of it. So, pretty much a book that teaches you how to not give a shit. That's really the best way to summarize it, and it's not that long of a read either. So, pretty good thing to dive into, and it'll always come up in conversation because of how renowned it is. Obviously, it's written by an emperor. Next up, The Art of Seduction. So this goes in good pairing with Revolt against the Modern World, which, spoiler alert, is next on my list. But the two, in my opinion, should be read ideally at the same time. They deal with charm and the topic of spirituality in much the same way, and they're a great contrast to one another. I wouldn't recommend reading this book with the other book by Robert Greene that's on this list. Robert Greene is the only author that repeats on this list, as he authored both the 48 Laws of Power and The Art of Seduction. But these books don't go well together, even though they're written in a similar style, because this one is about the subtle and manipulative tactics of seduction and the underlying psychological processes, whereas the 48 Laws of Power is more about maintaining control. So they're entirely different topics, even though there's some intersection. And the book provides advice on how to manipulate one's appearance, behavior, and language in order to seduce others and achieve one's goals. In a greater sense, it deals with crafting this idealized image of being imaginative, of being intuitive, in touch with people's needs, and using that ability to stay in touch with people's needs to get on their good side. And it has that hint of manipulation that all Robert Greene books do, but it also breaks down the different types of seduction so that you may be able to resist it better and also learn how to use it to your advantage. So, a really great psychological deep dive into seduction, and probably one of the best books on it out there. Next up, paired with The Art of Seduction, I believe, Revolt Against the Modern World. Personally, one of my favorite books, written by the extremely controversial Julius Evola. This book is a critique of modernity and a call for a return to traditional values and spirituality. The author argues that modernity has led to the decline of Western civilization, gives examples, gives philosophical musings, and advocates for a revival of ancient wisdom and spirituality to restore order and meaning to society. If you've ever been curious about things like Hinduism and Buddhism and ancient Vedic traditions, this book is pretty much all about it. It is a difficult read. It uses a lot of language that is archaic and arcane and not really difficult to, not really difficult to imagine, but somewhat problematic to decipher. It's language that you've seen before, but in strange text structures and combinations that you may not be used to. Evola writes in a very essayist style that is more abstract to some. But the general point of this book is that there lie great contradictions between the traditional world, as Evola sees it, before the 1600s and the Enlightenment, and a modern world. And that the modern world, in spite of all its technological advancements, has only declined in its adaptability to the individual. And this is one of the major reasons for the rise of dissatisfaction in the West. And it eventually predicts the breakdown of spiritual values in the West, and how adopting traditional values in different parts of the world may be beneficial to communities and traditions, largely sourcing ancient religious texts as the main point of argument. There's a lot of material in this book that is more all over the place and would need a complete breakdown, but it is one of the most readable texts regarding spirituality, and possibly one of the greatest philosophical works of the 20th century, in my opinion. Next up, another self-help book. This is probably the most self-help guide that you would traditionally associate with the genre here. But it's also very interesting. So this book is a self-help guide for men seeking to improve their relationships and dating skills, and it provides practical advice on how to develop confidence, attract women, and maintain healthy relationships. This book reasserts that only 3% of men truly understand women, which leads to the development of most toxic relationships from the man's side. So it blames the struggle in relationships on the man. So, yeah, that's a unique perspective. And pretty much says, learn relationship secrets that only 3% of the world's men know about being successful with women. And it goes into a lot of the idea of maintaining some sort of intrinsic value and having a filter system to make sure that you don't develop toxic relationships in your life. So, a pretty good read, I'd say. Next up, 12 Rules of Her Life. I've only read this recently, and I'm not a big Jordan Peterson fan, but I thoroughly enjoyed this book, simply because of how creative it was. And it's a self-help guide for individuals seeking to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, perhaps without coughing their lungs out. The book provides practical advice on how to develop self-discipline, take responsibility for one's actions, and find purpose and meaning in life. There are chapters like why you should always pet cats, or why you should never interrupt kids while skateboarding. And Jordan Peterson goes into the raising of his own daughter, Michaela, the lessons that he learned throughout his clinical practice, as well as the general historical and philosophical examples for each rule. He starts off talking about something like the idea of responsibility and goes on into the lobster hierarchy. He goes and delves into these very intricate ideas that have some connections to what he's talking about, but are generally distant enough for the book to be interesting and take you on this wild ride. I severely recommend this book simply because it was one of the best examples of how to structure something intuitively and creatively while still making it a working manual. The Unplugged Alpha. So this book is offered by Richard Cooper and is a self-help guide for men seeking to improve their dating and relationship skills. And the book provides practical advice on how to cultivate masculine energy, attract high-quality women, and navigate the landscape of modern dating. This book is very crude and to the point, but to many in this community it will severely serve as an impactful guide, as it also underlines the idea of having an intrinsic value, but takes this to a much more extreme level and focuses on the aspect of cultivating masculine energy primarily as a stepping stone to having the intrinsic idea of holding value oneself. And the last on my list, The Myth of Sissyphus by the legendary Albert Camus. This book is a philosophical essay on the nature of human existence and the meaning of life. It is primarily meant as an antidote to depression, and it argues that just like Sisyphus was condemned in the myth to pushing a boulder up a mountain forever, the only way to avert pain is to thoroughly enjoy it. And by terming himself somewhat of a self-masochist, Sisyphus could thoroughly enjoy his life of dragging a boulder up a hill forever simply because the struggle itself is worth living for. So the myth of Sisyphus seems to reassert that the struggle is one of the most essential parts of life, which is a very new idea in Camus' era. And this comes across as a particularly avant-garde essay. And the author, Albert Camus, uses the myth of Sisyphus, who is condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, as a metaphor for the human condition of facing a meaningless and absurd world. The myth of Sisyphus also introduces the philosophy of absurdism. So this is its doctrinal text, or at least it is considered its doctrinal text. The book explores the themes of freedom, choice, and a rebellion against the absurdity of life. And rebellion against the absurd, through the absurd, is something that we truly need in the modern world. This has been my list of books. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.